Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. Before we get into predicting Portugal, we are going to be doing what we should have done in the Qatar review episode, and that is run through our predictions. So to start up, PozzA is going to explain the system that we have decided to put in place for adding them up, seeing who wins at the end. Also, we are going to be trying to get some more people from the Discord server, basically, in just to have a chat, have them on for an episode or two. They can throw down some predictions. We're currently working with Kelly, and we think she'll be the first one. But over to PozzA to explain this fantasy scoring system.
Since we started the predictions last time in Qatar, we've come up with a completely new point system, just because we kind of forgot to do that. Just to see who's sort of better with the predictions throughout the year. Just jump right into explaining it. There should be a picture in the background, so if you don't understand it, that might help. So for each of the Sunday races in Moto3, Moto2, and MotoGP, we've made it so if you predict the rider that wins the race correctly, you'll get 15 points. If you get P2 correct, it's 10 points. P3, 5 points. And if you predict the right rider but you have them in the wrong place, such as you predicted them to finish second and they won, so on and so forth, you get 1 point. And for the sprint races, it's pretty much the same concept, just halved. So if you predict P1 correctly, 7.5 points. Get P2 correct, it's 5. P3 is 2.5. And right rider in the wrong place is 0.5. I believe Kate has how many points we both scored from Qatar, so I'll let her continue with how we're going.
And I find it quite funny because just before we were recording, PozzA and I were talking, and he changed it from right rider in the wrong place for the race from 3 points to 1 point, and in the sprint from 1.5 to 0.5, and he completely shot himself in the foot there. So before that, I was on something like 36 and he was on 18, and now I'm on 31 points. PozzA's on 6 points, so he has a huge amount to make up because last week I guessed both Alonso and Martin in the correct positions, and I had Holgado and Pecco in the podium but in the wrong places, basically. PozzA had got Alonso, Holgado, Pecco, Martin in the sprint, and Martin, Bagnaia, and Binder all on the podium, but he had them all in the wrong places. So he suffered quite significantly from changing the points at the last minute. But that's the joys of fantasy, I suppose. What do we call this? Fantasy scoring? Yeah.
To be fair, at least you can't say that I've tried to make this bias towards myself now, so.
No, I could not at all. So it's definitely a very fair fight, and I think we can thank ChatGPT for the scoring system. So, coming into today's recording, there was the breaking news that wasn't super breaking because the talks had started and the rumour mill had started before the end of last year, and that is the news that Firmin Aldeguer is moving up to MotoGP for the 2025 season, and he will be riding a Ducati. So, the tweet says, the Spanish rider will move up to MotoGP in 2025, and he has signed a 2-year agreement that will see him ride a Ducati starting next year with the option to extend his contract for another 2 years. So, where do you think he's going to go? Do you think he's going to be at Factory Ducati, Pramac, Grassini, VR46? What are your thoughts?
If you believe all the rumors that have been going around, which so far have pretty much proven to be right, seems like he'll be going to Pramac in place of Jorge Martin. I believe the rumors on that is he could be going to Aprilia, replacing who? I'm not sure yet. But yeah, I could see it being Pramac. Just the main thing I'm thinking is, obviously it's exciting that he's coming up, but I hope it's not one of the situations where they sort of rush a rider up too quickly. Most recent example I can think of where that sort of happened was Raul Fernandez. He probably could have used another year or two in Moto 2. But hoping that's not the case for Aldeguer. Seems like he has a lot of talent, so.
I am just going to point out I'm now going to need a photo of your cat. But yeah, I have to totally agree in regards to I hope he's not moving up too quickly. He's very young, and by the sounds of it, will be getting onto a 25 spec Ducati, so those are going to be some quite a bit of pressure. I do think he'll be Gunner Pramac. Realistically, I think both Pramac Ducati riders won't be there next year, and I know one race is far too hard to tell, especially for Frankie Morbidelli when he didn't have a preseason. But yeah, fingers crossed I'm wrong in that sense. Maybe, maybe not.
So now let's move on to Portugal. One thing I do want to mention is that I have been looking high and low to find out if they have changed the gravel at Portugal. Frankly, it does not seem like they have. For those of you who are new to watching MotoGP, for those of you who have short goldfish like memories like I do, last year we saw some horrific accidents at Portugal. The riders have been complaining about the gravel for numerous years. We're talking 3-4 years. It hasn't been changed. Riders have described it as like hitting a brick wall when they land on it. It's harsh, it's coarse, it hardly breaks up their fall or anything like that. I find this incredibly frustrating. I'm extremely passionate about rider safety, and I think this is just something that I know, the financial side of changing out all that gravel is absolutely massive. But what's going to be even more, financially hurtful is when this circuit gets us sued, when riders get injured after injury after injury. Paulo Spargaro, Carlos Tate, Jorge Martin, Fabio Di Gianantonio have all had serious injuries. Franco Morbidelli, already this year, serious injury. It's just not something that's sustainable long term, and I really hope that the riders kick up another huge fuss about it, because they should, and we as fans absolutely should as well, because we're not the ones going out there and risking our lives, our bodies, for entertainment. We're just sitting at home watching, and I find it a little bit, taking that shine off because of this. But alas, that's my little safety rant over. Kate's safety corner, I don't know what I'm going to call it. But moving on to the full Portugal predictions with PozzA.
Because it's another race week, I'm ridiculously excited. This track is a bit more windy, it's a bit more free flowing. So while I want to say I've predicted, some Japanese bikes getting up there, I haven't done that in the slightest. But I'm just going to jump right in with my Moto 3 predictions, because I have pretty much done the exact same as my predictions for Qatar, except I swapped P3 and P1. I've gone David Alonso for P3, David Munoz for P2, and Danny Holgado for P1. Who are you going with?
I was very close to going the same three riders, just in a slightly different order. But starting from P3, I have Ortola. Um, Obviously, he'll be hoping for a better result this weekend, crashing out in Qatar. Um, the top two, I feel like, are going to be a top two that we have quite a lot this year. Also, slightly based on last year. I've put David Alonso in P2 and Danny Holgado to win. Moving on to Moto 2. In P3, I've put Manu Gonzalez on the Grassini. Um, Moto 2 this year could just, it could be very random, um, just with all the whole tyre situation. Um, but yeah, I think Manu should have a good weekend, so I think he'll be up there. Um, I have Aaron Canet in second. I feel like he normally gets pretty close to the podium in Portugal, either on it or just off of it. Um, haven't predicted him to get his first win this weekend. I've put the winner as Fermin Aldeguer. Um, he'll just be hoping to get some points on the board, I'd say. And if he can do that with the win on the same weekend or same week that he's been announced to go to MotoGP, I think that'll just top everything off quite well. How about you?
Okay, for starters, I'm feeling personally attacked that you put Canet in P2, but you know. For P3, I have put Somcat Chantra. He was strong here last year, and I think that, to be fair, I think all of the riders are going to have learnt quite a lot from last week. On that tyre situation, I did actually hear some talk on the Oxley Bum podcast, which, if anyone listening to this does want a really great insider's view, the Oxley Bum podcast is absolutely incredible. Because on there they said that as soon as the World Superbike guys saw the tyre choices for Qatar, they knew that the likes of Canet, Aldeguer, that they'd stuffed up basically. Because apparently that tyre was far too hard for the temperature of the track. And so I thought that was quite an interesting take. So I think all these guys are going to have learned a lot from last week. So in P2, I've put Tony Arbolino, and in P1, probably who I'm going to go for all year, Aaron Canet. It's got to be his year. So, I mean, this is my hill that I will die on. He's got to have his win this year. Moving over to the sprint race for MotoGP, I'm probably living on a bit of hopium for my predictions this year. Maverick Vinales, again, strong last year at Portimao from memory. Oh my gosh. Yes, we're in Portimao. Sorry, for some reason I thought we were in Qatar. But he was strong here last year. I think he is going to put in a really strong performance. I feel like maybe he's going to all of a sudden realize that he's got to fight for this seat, and while normally he doesn't perform under pressure, it's going to be early enough in the season that I think we can see him on the podium. In P2, I put Marc Marquez. He got a podium in the sprint here last year on that absolute mess of a Honda. So now he's got a decent bike under him. I think P2 is pretty easy for him. And in P1, I've put the Sprint King, Jorge Martin.
I'd say I've gone pretty similar. Um, just jump right in. P3, I have Marc Marquez. Um, sort of based on last year, just with the fact that in the sprint, at least, he was up there on the podium on the Honda, now that he's on the Ducati. Obviously, being completely different bike, a lot better. I think he should get up there. Obviously, it's Marc Marquez who'll be pushing as hard as he can, no matter what. Um, in second, I've put Brad Binder. Again, sort of based on last year. KTM looked pretty strong and has looked pretty strong around Portimao, just in general. So not much else on that. And first place, same as you, I've put Jorge Martin. Just seems virtually unbeatable in most of the sprint races. Moving on to the Sunday race, I've gone with the top three that I'll probably go with for most of the races this year. Brad Binder in P3. Just don't really see anyone else getting up there. Again, KTM's worked pretty well around this track in the past. P2, Pecco Bagnaia. I feel like in the sprint he'll probably just miss out in maybe fourth or fifth again. Again, this could be completely based off of last week or last race. And And P1, I've put Jorge Martin to get his first race win of the year.
I feel quite bad for not putting Brad Binder, because I did go back. Admittedly, maybe it's cheating for the predictions, but I did go back and watch last year's race, and Brad was actually suffering quite badly from a preseason crash, so that would have impacted his first race last year. But for my podium, I have gone with Marc Marquez in P3. I think even though obviously he's a clear talent, I think he's still going to take a little bit to get up to pace on that longer races. Maverick Vinales P2, I think that 3-4-3 manufacturers is just going to elude him. And basically, same as last week, I think Pecco Bagnaia is going to take the top spot. I just think that he's going to continue this, I don't know, what do we call it, consistent form until someone comes along and unsettles him a bit. I do want Martin to be up there, but I just don't think he's got it yet. Fingers crossed I'm wrong. One thing I suppose we should now move into is the reserve riders. So this was an idea that PozzA thought of because we probably have such a high attrition rate in MotoGP, Moto2 and Moto3 that we should have a backup rider. So this occurs, and PozzA, do correct me if I'm wrong at the end of this, if a rider crashes before the race or the sprint race, so if they crash anytime before basically the lights go out, this rider is basically their substitution. So my prediction was Pecco is going to win the race. Say Pecco doesn't start the race for whatever reason, this rider would come in and replace them. So are those rules correct?
I'm pretty sure that's what we agreed on.
Okay, that makes it nice and easy then.
Yeah, this whole idea pretty much just came from the fact that you predicted Jake Dixon for Moto 2 in Qatar to get, I think, third. And after the first or second day, he was already out of the race. So just something to try and even it out if that keeps happening this year.
Which hopefully it doesn't, but we should also mention we haven't seen anything as at the time of recording as to whether Dixon's going to be racing this weekend because he had quite a nasty high side in Qatar and suffered lung injuries. So fingers crossed he is okay. But I'll just say all of my reserves and then I'll pass back over to PozzA for his. So for Moto 3, I've gone for Rueda, Moto 2, Lopez, and for both the sprint and the Grand Prix, probably because I felt bad from putting him outside of the podium, my reserve is Brad Binder for both.
I'm just going to be completely honest here. Our Moto 3 and Moto 2 reserves are the exact same. I've also gone with Rueda and Lopez. Um, Both of mine are different for GP though. For the sprint, I've put Pecco Bagnaia, and for the race, I have Marc Marquez.
We can put our Moto 2 and Moto 3 predictions down to great minds think alike. I'm pretty sure, even though I do think we've both gone for the same reasoning, in the fact that you said before that it would probably be whoever we think is going to finish P4, which is fairly understandable, really.
Another thing, I feel like the top, well, P1, P2, P3, and the reserve for Moto 3 are going to pretty much stay the same four riders across most of the year if they don't get injured.
Was that for Moto 3?
Yeah, I feel like the top fours, again, if they finish most of the races and are fit, is sort of going to be Holgado, Alonso, Ortola, and Rueda. That's what I think anyway.
Considering I've had Munoz in my last two podiums, I'm going to have to disagree. But I do understand what you're saying. I actually think that aside from last weekend in Qatar, I think Moto 2 is going to get back to being a bit more predictable. I do think that that was sort of an outlier race based on new tyres and things like that.
So that's it for this week's podcast. Do let us know in the comments below or messages on social media what your predictions are, because I absolutely adore hearing everyone's different takes, because they can be so absolutely wild. Very excited for this week's racing. Very excited for digesting it next week, because we are here every Tuesday, and if you're enjoying this, like and subscribe, and we will be back.